West Ham 3, Liverpool 2. The Reds' 25-game unbeaten run ended at the London Stadium. I'm Guy Clarke, he's Matt Addison, and we're here to react to defeat to David Moyes' Hammers here on the Blood Red channel. Well, Matt, how do you sum that one up? 3 goals conceded, and I suppose right from the off, and Alisson's own goal kind of set the tone, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. As soon as that goes in, you kind of felt like it wasn't going to be Liverpool's day. And yeah, whenever you play that poorly in a defensive sense, and it wasn't just the goalkeeper. I know for a couple of the goals, it was something that I'm sure Alisson will look back and think he should have done far better. But just that the entire team, front to back, didn't play particularly well defensively. Struggled, I think, to break West Ham down. I think West Ham played brilliantly well, but Liverpool just haven't really been at it so far defensively this season. They've, obviously had certain games when they've been fine, but there's just been far too many games where they've conceded 2 or 3. Obviously, Brighton last weekend, Atletico Madrid. Sometimes you get away with it, sometimes you don't. It's becoming a bit of a theme now. And, when you concede 3 against Brentford, you concede 3 against West Ham, you're not really going to pick up too many points. And, I think that's the disappointment really for Liverpool, is that defensively it should be a big strength of theirs. I'm not quite sure what's happening with Andy Robertson at the moment. He seems miles off it. Virgil van Dijk has obviously come back from a big injury. I don't think he's quite at it just yet. And, we've said it plenty of times in the past, when Liverpool's defensive unit and the whole team isn't absolutely spot on, it can fall apart very quickly. And we've seen that with the high line for a couple of the goals. We've seen it, plenty of times this season. I think when it's bad, it's really bad. And unfortunately for Jurgen Klopp, that is, ultimately the case at the moment.
Yeah, and it is the case that, as you said there, the number of goals being conceded, it's sort of 4 times now in the last 6 Premier League games that 2 or more have been conceded. The only 2 that there weren't any conceded in, of course, were the 2 5-0 wins over Watford and over Manchester United. But in that time, it's 10 goals conceded in 6 games. And those other games, bar the 2 5-0s, have been draws or defeats now. Points that are being dropped that Liverpool really can't afford to be dropping, especially when you consider this weekend Burnley's result at Stamford Bridge. It seemed a great opportunity and chance for Liverpool to close that gap to Chelsea.
Well, exactly that. I mean, there's obviously been other results. The Southampton went to Manchester City and drew a few weeks ago. There's been other teams dropping points, but I think there's only so many times that you can look at other teams and think in this title race that, oh, it's okay because City have dropped points or Chelsea have dropped points. At some point, when they drop points, you have to take advantage of it, and that's not something that Liverpool have really been able to do up until this point. They've had far too many draws. I mean, the draws are absolutely killing them at the moment. I think obviously a defeat is worse, but it's almost better if you have that binary: you win or you lose, you get the 3 points or you don't get any. And there's been far too many draws this season. But I think the drop points, whether it's a draw or a defeat, I think it comes back to the defense. If you concede in that many goals, you're asking a huge amount of those forwards to go and score goals away from home. Obviously, Atletico Madrid, you'd never think that a team could go there and score 3, but Liverpool did it, and it's just not something you can do consistently. At some point, you have to keep those goals down and make sure that you defend first. And obviously, if you get a couple of goals, you expect to win the game. And for Liverpool to have scored twice tonight against that West Ham defensive unit, I think is still impressive. They did create a few chances. Probably Mane should have scored when it was 1 each to put Liverpool in front, and there were a few moments where it looked promising, but ultimately, I keep saying it, but if you concede 3 goals in a game, you don't really deserve anything more than a defeat. So, yeah, that's the frustration for Liverpool. There's a lot to work on, a lot to improve. They're still in the top 4. You're not overly worried by them, but yeah, as much as West Ham played well, if Liverpool turned up today, it was a massive opportunity really to close the gap at the top. And we're sat here saying it again. They've dropped points and missed that opportunity.
Yeah, it's the old adage, isn't it, that it's really defences that do win you titles, attacks win you games, and defences win you titles. A lot of people getting in touch in the comments section. You mentioned earlier about Andy Robertson, and a lot of people saying that it's time for Kostas Tsimikas to be put in. A lot of people raving over his performance in midweek against Atletico Madrid. But is it as simple as maybe just 1 or 2 personnel changes, or does it not look at the moment as though it is kind of a structural issue and maybe even higher up than just the defence to midfield? For example, between kind of the second West Ham goal and the third one, just kept coming through the midfield time after time.
Yeah, I think for me, the midfield is a massive issue. I think there's obviously so many injuries in that area. We've seen it at times last season that maybe Thiago isn't perfectly suited defensively. I think it was a pretty poor performance when he came on from him. I actually thought he might be able to help Liverpool break down the defence, but you did worry a little bit in terms of him going the other way. I think Oxlade-Chamberlain, again, is slightly more attacking and maybe less defensive minded than what Jurgen Klopp might like out of a number 8 in his midfield. I think there's a bit of a balance issue in that regard, which certainly doesn't help. I mean, Fabinho and Henderson are 2 out of the 3 that you'd want to be in there, but it doesn't take much, I think, against a team like West Ham and the quality that they've got in the middle of the pitch. Although Declan Rice was fantastic again. I think he's had a really good 18 months, and when you come up against a midfield like that, you've got to be absolutely on top of your game, and Liverpool weren't, and that's where the little gaps open up, I think. So, yeah, for me, it's a defensive issue in terms of the whole team, but the midfield is a massive issue. I do think, that there is a conversation to be had at the very least about individuals, Andy Robertson and Kostas Tsimikas being one of them, but for me, it's not really in a defensive sense that Liverpool missed Tsimikas today. I think it's more in the final third, that final ball, particularly the first half. There was quite a few chances for Robertson to get to the byline and pull something back, and he was just kind of doing it in hope, really, rather than actually pinpointing a position that he wanted to put that ball into, or a player that he wanted to pick out. It was just a case of hooking one back and hoping that there was someone in the right place. And for me, that's something that Kostas has got on him. I think not just from dead balls, but also in general play. He's got that ability to pick out his man when he gets to the byline, and I think that is where Liverpool missed Tsimikas today. Defensively, I don't think there's too much between them, and as I say, there's other circumstances around that. But yeah, it's hard to disagree. Actually, I think Tsimikas being in there today would have helped Liverpool, but I can understand at the same time why he's gone with Robertson. They're two very, very good footballers, but yeah, for me, the difference in terms of the two of them today, at least, would have been in that final third.
A lot of individual names being kind of thrown into the chat box of players who maybe didn't show up and play too well today. One name I've not seen thus yet, though, Matt, and want to ask you about it. 4 minutes into the game is Alisson Becker. He was questioned for the first goal scored by Brighton last weekend at Anfield, and equally today, similar kind of thing, as it were, in terms of a high ball put into the box. Obviously, last week he didn't have bodies around him. This week he did, but is there a concern there, or is that kind of just being hypercritical?
I don't think it's a concern yet. I mean, we have seen it at times, haven't we? There was a similar sort of one against Burnley, which I think should have been a foul a couple of years back. Yeah. I think this was maybe one of those that I don't think you can have any complaints, really. I think VAR, well, it definitely did because it was a goal. So it took a look at that and decided there wasn't a foul there, which I agree with. But I think, yeah, they've got to be a little bit stronger. And to concede 2 goals from set pieces, you always are going to look at the goalkeeper and your 2 centre-backs. And I think, West Ham have scored more from set pieces than any other team this season. So in that regard, you can kind of say, well, maybe it was understandable. But I think the way that I would look at it is that it can't have been a surprise. Early on, at least in the game, Liverpool have to be switched on to the fact that they've got big, strong players, aerial dominance. It's something that David Moyes' teams have always had, but West Ham, I think, are superb at that. And when you put the ball into a difficult area, I think the goalkeeper's got to be a little bit stronger. I think there's got to be a little bit more work from the defenders in front of him to sort of move Mikel Antonio out of the way. I just think collectively Liverpool had to be a little bit more switched on. I mean, if anyone had have watched anything of West Ham this season, how good they are from set pieces. And for Liverpool to presumably have worked on that all week and then obviously come into the game and within 4 minutes they're a goal down to a set piece. Yeah, that's got to be a real disappointment. I know West Ham are very, very good at those things, but to concede 2 in one game, I don't think is really acceptable defensively.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, as I say, probably the criticism of Alisson probably a bit over the top there, but yeah, no, just thought it was worth flagging because it is 2 kind of goals that you're not used to kind of seeing him concede or see Liverpool concede. But as I say, it is the number of goals that are racking up in the conceded column. What are your sort of thoughts then on the way the weekend's played out regarding this for Liverpool? Because as I said before, Chelsea dropped points, only 4 points off Chelsea. A real opportunity to close that gap at the top end of the Premier League table. But I suppose we're seeing at the moment, no one has really quite hit their stride. And hopefully this international break, Jurgen Klopp alluded to it in his pre-match press conference, might be a chance to get a few bodies back and really hit it strong off the back of the return to action.
Yeah, no, that's it. That's what you've got to hope, isn't it? I think the rhythm will help Liverpool. I don't think it's been massively useful, actually, for Jurgen Klopp and his players that they've had 3 international breaks to cope with already this season. So the fact that they are going to have game after game for a period of time could help them. I think it will just be a case of, which one of Liverpool, City or Chelsea can go on a run and can string together, a good few wins in a row. And if Liverpool are going to do it, you do think it's going to have to be off the back of this international break. I think that's the time really when it's set up for them to go on that little bit of a run. Obviously, they've not got the Champions League commitments. I know the other teams in title contention in this country are in good positions as well in their own Champions League groups. But I think, for a team which the squad looks a little bit stretched at the moment, I think it helps Liverpool more than it helps the other teams. So, yeah, I think there's an opportunity for Liverpool to string a few games and wins together. But you always have to look at the other teams. And I think, Manchester City in particular are just as likely to be able to do that. So, yeah, it's a big opportunity missed. We have to hope that Liverpool have enough about them to be able to put a few of these things right during the international break. It's going to feel like a long couple of weeks, I think, before Liverpool play Arsenal next time out. But yeah, they've got to sort out a few of these problems. The international break possibly will help them do that. It'll certainly help them get 1 or 2 players back, assuming, of course, that nobody else gets injured whilst they're away with their countries. But yeah, I think there's got to be a run from one of these top 3 teams at some point this season. And yeah, for me, if it's going to be Liverpool, it's got to be pretty soon. I think it's about that time of the year where you think the games kind of fall a bit in Liverpool's favour in the fact that they don't tend to deal too well when it's a bit disjointed and they have to deal with things in 2s and 3s. What they want is a big long run of games, get that rhythm, get that momentum, and they do have an opportunity after the internationals that are out of the way to be able to do that.
Yeah, when you look at the next 6 Premier League games, it's Arsenal at home, Southampton at home, away to Everton and away to Wolves before home games with Aston Villa and Newcastle before really beginning to hit that festive programme of games, Champions League games with Porto at home and AC Milan away within that run as well. But final point before we go then, I mentioned it right at the top, it was a chance today to go into the history books outright, to go 26 games unbeaten. How frustrating, added on top of obviously the context of this season, is it as well that Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool couldn't kind of create that history for themselves and really use that as a bit of motivation to get them over the line?
Yeah, I think that's the frustration. I don't think the record itself matters massively. I think it's more a case of, the sort of aura around Liverpool has been a little bit broken, and how much of an aura there was, I don't know, because within that period, there has been a fair few draws. I know they've played, obviously, some big teams in there as well, but it's not like they've won all of those games consecutively. There's still been, frustrations within that period. So it is frustrating. I think it gives a bit of an opportunity. To be honest, I think that the draw with Brighton last week probably gave West Ham a bit of confidence that they could come into this one and do something. That's the bigger worry, I think, is that it gives teams a bit more of a confidence that they can get something from Liverpool. And if they do attack them, there's been far too much evidence this season that, Brentford and other teams, that Liverpool shouldn't be conceding 3 goals against, if we're all being honest, have been able to do that fairly easily. So that's the bigger concern. I think, of course, it would have been nice to get that little bit of history, obviously, to extend that and make it, I think, what would it have been, 26 games, which is no mean feat to have, or hypothetically to have been able to do that. But yeah, the bigger picture is that it's points dropped this season is more than just that unbeaten run, and ultimately, if Liverpool bounce back, it will be forgotten very quickly. But yeah, I suppose it just does add a little bit of salt to the wound after a disappointing result.
Yeah, well, that's it from us here on the debrief, here on the Blood Red channel. Stick with us. We will have Jurgen Klopp's post-match press conference to come, as well as David Moyes as well. Hopefully, Jurgen Klopp giving the reasons and explanations to Liverpool suffering that first defeat, just a first defeat in 26 outings for his side. But for myself, Guy Clarke and Matt Addison, thanks for your time and your company here on the debrief. Bye for now.